without a question, my father and spankers out there read this to the end. It is to your advantage. Actually, for a child, a very dangerous man. He was away at sea for 9/12 of a month a year and didn't know the difference between dealing with children as opposed to adults. On his ships the average age was about 40. Working with children for what may only be 2 weeks at a time, it was difficult for him to control his temper in accordance with the behavior of children v adults. To disobey him was asking for not a spanking but assault. Actually, on one occasion when I was about 10, we went into town together and had agreed to meet somewhere so I could get a lift home. I had forgotten where we had parked the car, missed him, so walked home. In the meantime he had returned to the car, found I was not there, assumed I had disobeyed him, and returned home. Only to find that I was no there. I was walking 2 miles, he was driving, so we missed each other again, and went off to find me. I returned home to find my mother in the kitchen, anxious that my father had come home in a very bad temper and that she had been told to keep me at home until he returned. I was talking to my mother when he stormed in through the back door, shouted at me for not meeting him, and then went for me, pulling my trousers down to the ground along with underwear, genitals on display, and smacked my bare buttocks as hard as he could. You have to bear in mind that he was 6 feet and 17 stone. I would have been about 4 feet 10 and 5 stone, so the power difference was enormous. Being small actually was an advantage, as I managed to wriggle free and moved to the other side of the kitchen, where he went for me again, still in a raging temper and shouting at me. I still had my trousers around my ankles and now cornered. As it happened, where I had been cornered there was a utensil drawer. He went for me again, and this was now, in my view, a case of outright defense and need to be safe. Opening the drawer and not looking, dropped my hand in and picked up the nearest thing I could find, which turned out to be a carving knife. I told him if he came any closer I would kill him, and I meant it. This took him aback, and I moved forward fast enough to pull my trousers and run past him, showing him I still had the knife in my hand. Actually, my father genuinely had a fear of knives in the form of a weapon, since he had witnessed knife fights on board ships and shore in other countries, and as he said to me when we were much older, if you ever pull a knife on someone, do not expect to put it back without blood on it. Largely that is true, including guns insofar as if you prime a gun, then you are not going to put it back without it being discharged. However, I had the knife in my hand and screamed in my hand and told him to get back or I would kill him, and I meant it. In the second that he was frozen to move, I dodged past him, ran upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom. He tried to talk me out of the room, and all I would do was put more furniture against the door, and told him if he didn't go away I would kill myself. As it happened, my bedroom window was open and managed to drop to the ground, breaking the fall on some soft bedding bushes in garden. I ran down to my friend's house and in terror and in tears started knocking on the door to be let in. The mother let me in and, seeing I was in a severe state, tried to calm me down to find out what had happened. My friend and his sister were there too and very anxious about me. In the meantime, my mother had sent my father away from the house to see his parents some miles away. But my fear of him returning whilst I was asleep and attacking me again meant I was not prepared to go home. My friend's father in the meantime had come into the house and the phone rang with my mother asking whether I had gone to them. She was told I was with them, but neither mother or father were to come down or he would call the police. He also agreed that I could stay the night to sleep on their sofa, so I felt safe. They gave me tea and later, when they were closing the house down for the night, made a bed up on the sofa. The following morning had breakfast with them. And my friend and I went out cycling together. We used to go miles, smiley face. And much later that day I went home. By this time my father had returned from his parents, grandma and granddad, to me, and clearly granddad had ripped into father for doing what he had. I still dodged past my father, locking the door behind me. He was of course far more calm now. 36 hours had passed, and talking through the door told me he was sorry, etc. However, after that I never really trusted him again and didn't like being with him on my own. My fear was that great. In fact, I was 20 when I left home. Although that was for slightly different reasons, insofar as my father had been made redundant and he and mother were relocating about 100 miles away, so I had to find accommodation. Ironically, it was my grandfather who helped me with part of the deposit for the flat, as I needed more than most because of my age and lending risk. Being 20, I was not well paid either and borrowing 4x my salary, and my interest rate high, so it was a very tight piece of financial management. It is of note that similar events, although not the smacking, occurred with my sister and father, usually as shouting matches, and he lost her trust. She went to college and later moved to a house in a large city 200 miles from where my parents were, and I was a 100. In UK terms, those are quite large distances. In part this was down to sheer logistics and happenstance, but geographically neither my sister and I came any closer to our parents' house. We just comfortably far enough away that our father had to think before he came to visit us, and actually we never invited him up. We would go to see him and mother, even when we're adults. So this burst have bad temper and assault by my father when I was young destroyed a father-son relationship. Kept us miles apart and my father very much at arm's length right through the majority of our adulthood. Even in my late teens, early 20s, I greeted him with a handshake. And certainly after the events described above, I had no wish to hug or cuddle him as a child. My fear of his unstable behavior was that great. Not only fear but total loss of trust, and of course, had nearly cost him his life 10 years earlier. Spank your child at your own risk. It could be you looking down the business end of a carving knife.